Trigger warning. Before we begin, I want to let you all know that these stories are intense, emotional, and disturbing. If you're not comfortable with dark and serious topics, I suggest clicking off this video. The purpose of this video is to shed light on the harsh realities that first responders face every day. Please show respect to these courageous individuals for their bravery and willingness to share their experiences. If you're ready, let's begin. Story 1. The car wreck. It was the middle of summer, the kind of night when the streets are eerily quiet and the world feels still. I was in my early 20s, uncertain about what I wanted to do with my life. A neighbor, a paramedic with years of experience, suggested I go on a ride along. She told me, "This job isn't for everyone, but you'll never truly understand it unless you see it for yourself." I was both excited and nervous as I climbed into the ambulance that night. We responded to a few routine calls, nothing too alarming. But as the clock approached 1 a.m., the radio crackled with urgency. A major car accident had been reported on the highway. My neighbor turned to me and said, "Brace yourself." When we arrived, the scene was chaos. A family's car had been crushed between two massive trucks. The sight was overwhelming: twisted metal, shattered glass, and the eerie glow of emergency lights reflecting off the wreckage. The parents were unresponsive, and it became clear they hadn't survived. In the back seat, a teenage girl was trapped, her voice weak as she called for her mom. We worked desperately to free her, but her injuries were severe. Despite all efforts, she slipped away before we could get her to the hospital. That experience stayed with me for years. The weight of seeing someone so young lose their life and knowing her final moments were filled with pain and fear was unbearable. It made me realize I wasn't cut out for this line of work. Story 2. The 911 call. As a 911 dispatcher, you learn to listen for the smallest details. The job is more than answering calls. It's about being the calm in someone's worst moment. One night, I received a call that began as a faint whisper. I could barely make out the woman's voice, but she managed to give me an address before the line went dead. My heart raced. Was she in immediate danger? Was she hurt? I dispatched officers to the address and informed them of the situation. When they arrived, they were met by a man who insisted there was no problem. He was calm, almost too calm. Something didn't sit right with the officers, so they stayed in the area. A few moments later, one of them spotted a small hand waving from a second-story window. That was all they needed. They entered the house and discovered the woman, restrained and visibly shaken. She had been through a terrifying ordeal, but was alive and safe thanks to her quick thinking and the officer's persistence. To this day, I can't forget the fear in her whispered words or the relief in her voice when she was rescued. It's a reminder of how critical every second can be in these situations. Story 3. The basement discovery. My grandfather was a police officer for over 40 years, and his stories always fascinated me. But one, in particular, stood out, a case that left an indelible mark on him. It was a cold winter evening when he and his partner were called to perform a welfare check. Neighbors hadn't seen a man named Bill for days, and there was an unsettling smell coming from his house. When they entered the home, the air was heavy, and the silence was deafening. They made their way to the basement, where they found Bill standing at the bottom of the stairs, as if he was about to leave. But something was off. He wasn't moving. As they got closer, they realized Bill had passed away. The cause was tragic, and the circumstances were haunting. The tension on a rope had left him in an upright position, creating the illusion that he was standing. It was a chilling sight that stayed with my grandfather long after he retired. Story 4. The worst shift. When I was a student paramedic, I knew the job would be challenging, but nothing could have prepared me for what I witnessed one fateful night. We were called to a house where the police had detained a man. Inside, the The scene was horrifying. A woman had endured unimaginable harm, and the atmosphere was heavy with despair. My mentor, a seasoned paramedic, remained composed as we did our best to provide care. What broke me was not the scene itself, but the children. Two young kids were brought out of the house, their faces full of confusion and fear. One of them looked up at me with wide eyes and asked, "Where's my mom?" I had no words, no way to explain the unexplainable. That question echoed in my mind for weeks, a painful reminder of the fragility of life and the resilience of those who bear witness to its darkest moments. Story 5. The House of Dogs. Sometimes, the calls you think will be straightforward turn out to be anything but. An EMT friend once shared a story about responding to a report of a foul odor coming from a house. They expected to find a deceased person, but were met with a completely different kind of tragedy. When they entered the home, they were greeted by 38 dogs, many in terrible condition. The smell was overwhelming, a mix of neglect and desperation. The team worked tirelessly to rescue the surviving animals, partnering with the local humane society to ensure they received the care they needed. While the scene was heartbreaking, there was a silver lining. Many of the dogs found loving homes, and the incident raised awareness about animal cruelty in the area. It was a reminder that even in the darkest situations, there can be hope. Story 6. The Dispatcher's Nightmare. As a dispatcher, you hear all kinds of calls, but some stay with you forever. One call in particular haunts me to this day. A young man called, his voice calm, but filled with sorrow. He spoke about feeling lost and apologized for how his decision might affect me. I tried to keep him on the line, to offer some kind of comfort or connection, but he hung up. We sent responders to his location, but it was too late. He had already made his choice. The weight of that call was immense. I often think about him and wonder if there was something more I could have said to change the outcome. Story 7. The Community's Loss. The final story is one of community and heartbreak. It was a rainy evening, and the roads were slick with water when a car crash was reported near a notorious hill. When responders arrived, they found a young girl who had been thrown from the vehicle. A nearby resident, who happened to be a nurse, tried to perform CPR. I was on the phone with her, guiding her through the process, but it was clear the situation was dire. In the background, I heard a trembling voice, a friend of the girl, asking, "Is she going to be okay?" It was a question no one wanted to answer. The loss shook the entire community, but it also brought people together. A memorial was set up at the crash site, a somber reminder of the dangers of the road and the fragility of life. First responders and dispatchers face unimaginable challenges every day. Their resilience, compassion, and courage deserve our utmost respect. If these stories have impacted you, please reach out for support. And if you're able, consider learning CPR or first aid. You never know when you might be the one to save a life. Thank you for listening, and please take care of yourselves and each other. Dispatcher's Heartbreak. A night I'll never forget. It was my second full-time shift as a police dispatcher. A Thursday night around 11 o'clock, when I took the call that I'll never forget. The air in the office was still, and everything felt calm, almost too calm. We were expecting a busy night, but nothing prepared me for what would unfold. The phone rang. A woman's screams filled the line. Screams, pure, unrelenting screams of terror. Almost too much to comprehend. That was all I heard. No words, just screams. And then, the line cut out. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to call her back, but the line was dead. Panic began to creep into my chest. That's when the second call came in. 9-11. What's your emergency? I answered, trying to steady my breathing, hoping to make sense of what had just happened. I think I just heard a gunshot, the voice on the other end of the line said. It was the neighbor across the street from where the screams had come from. And now, my neighbor. I think something terrible is happening. I quickly got more details from the caller. Then the line went dead. I felt my hands begin to shake, but I forced myself to focus. I was trained for this. I had to keep calm. I heard the urgent voices of my partners asking for updates, but all I could focus on was the woman's screams. It was as if they echoed in my mind, relentless, haunting. But then, as the second call was coming to an end, my phone rang again. This time, it was the original caller. She was back on the line, her voice still filled with desperation. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I need to know what happened. I need to know if he's okay. Please." "Ma'am, please, calm down. What's going on?" I asked, trying to make sense of the chaos. "My husband." Her voice wavered, and I heard her struggle to control her sobs. "He's dead. I think he just killed himself. He was fine a minute ago. We were watching TV. Everything was normal. Then he just got up and went outside. He said he'd be right back. But I heard the door close, and then the gunshot. I tried to keep her on the line, trying to calm her down, but she was inconsolable, pacing around the house, falling to the floor in despair. She didn't want to believe what she had just witnessed. I asked her if she could stay inside, not wanting her to leave the safety of her home. She begged me to let her go out and help him, but I could hear the terror in her voice, the fear that seeing him would break her completely. I kept telling her to stay inside, that help was on the way. She was married to the love of her life for 27 years. They had 2 kids, 3 grandkids, and a good life together. She had no warning, no signs of anything wrong, just an ordinary evening that would end in tragedy. I gave the officers the details of the situation as I got them. Every word I spoke felt heavier than the last. The urgency was real, but it didn't make the weight of the situation any lighter. She continued to scream, to sob uncontrollably, asking for her husband, her life, back. Then, as the minutes dragged on, I heard the worst thing I'd ever heard. The unmistakable sound of her voice broken, shattered, crying out in anguish. The officers arrived at the scene soon after, and I had to keep listening to the call. Her screams lingered in my mind long after we'd hung up. They found him, the man she loved, lying on the back porch. His life ended in an instant by the gunshot. He had used a black powder pistol. I don't remember her name, but her screams are seared into my memory. I will never be able to forget her anguish. The next call came a few hours later, still on that same night. This time, it was a woman in her 90s. She had called 911 to report a potential intruder on her property. The call seemed routine at first. An elderly woman with dementia was confused, thinking someone was outside, trying to break in, but she didn't know that she had already called 911. She had forgotten. When the officers arrived, they knocked on the door, and the woman thought they were the intruders. Panic set in, and she, in a moment of confusion, grabbed a gun. The police on the scene had no idea what was happening until the woman started shooting. I could hear the shots on the line, frantic and frightening. "Stop! Please, calm down." I tried to shout into the receiver, but it was useless. The shots were getting closer. I couldn't understand why this was happening. Over the line, I could hear the officers yelling, the chaos unfolding. My heart raced. "She's got a gun. She's shooting at us," one officer shouted, and I knew there was nothing more I could do but stay on the line, trying to talk her down. It was terrifying. I tried to use my training, reminding her that they weren't intruders, that they were there to help. After several tense moments, I could hear the officers shouting again. They'd managed to calm her down, but not before she had nearly shot an officer by mere inches. When it was all over, the police let out a collective sigh of relief, but that didn't take away the unsettling feeling that lingered in the air. The woman, despite the terrifying ordeal, was moved to a nursing home after the incident. Dementia is a cruel thing. It wasn't long before I received another devastating call. This one, I wasn't prepared for at all. A girl, around 19 or 20 years old, had called 911 with a chilling statement. All she said was, "I'm just calling to let you know where to find my body." I froze. I had heard my fair share of suicide calls, but this one hit too close to home. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are you?" But the girl's response was unnerving. "I'm old enough to know that you already know where I am." Her voice was flat, emotionless, but I knew I had to keep her talking, keep her on the phone for as long as possible. It was the only way to prevent her from going through with it. I asked her how she planned to do it, hoping to keep the conversation going. There was no answer. Nothing but a cold silence that made my blood run cold. Then I heard a crash followed by a choking sound. My heart dropped to my stomach. I feared she had already gone through with it. "No, no, no," I whispered under my breath. I immediately dispatched paramedics and police, desperately hoping we could reach her in time. As I listened to the radio, my anxiety only grew. I could hear the officers trying to confirm her address, but they couldn't find it. They searched for what felt like an eternity, but no one could find her. After what felt like forever, I finally heard her voice again. She was crying, and I could hear the relief in my own voice as I asked her what had happened. Through her tears, she told me she had tried to hang herself, but the shower curtain rod had bent under her weight. She wasn't dead, but she was still in danger. The relief I felt was fleeting. We still had no idea where she was. I instructed my officers to head south, hoping we were in the right direction. I kept talking to her, trying to calm her, to get her to hold on until help arrived. She went silent again, leaving me with nothing but the echo of my own thoughts, wondering if I had missed something, if there was more I could have done. Eventually, the officers found her. They brought her to safety, and she was taken to the hospital. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I had been holding. She was alive. But for how long? How many others would I have to deal with in my career? I sat in silence for a while, reflecting on everything that had just happened. No matter how long I do this job, it never gets easier. The calls are always there, lingering in the back of my mind, keeping me awake at night. And the worst part is knowing that there are people out there, just like the ones I spoke to, whose lives are hanging by a thread. I'll carry these moments with me forever. The job of a dispatcher is unlike any other. It's not about the calls you take. It's about the people behind those calls, the ones who call you in their time of crisis, when everything seems to be falling apart. It's about hearing their pain, their heartbreak, their terror, and knowing that you can't always help, no matter how hard you try. But you keep trying, and you remember them, every single one of them. If you've had a similar experience or would like to share your thoughts, don't hesitate to reach out. And remember, if you ever find yourself in a moment of darkness, don't hesitate to call for